Hi, everyone. We're here to target the right podcasts. And why? We want to grow our digital footprint in audio and in video. So, why should you be on a podcast? Is it advantageous to you if you already have one or if you don't? Let's start with if you have a podcast. So, first thing, going on other shows will help cross pollinate your audiences and your community. It makes yours bigger and in turn makes theirs bigger. And if sales are your endeavor, you need to get out of your echo chamber and share your ideas with those other audiences. And the second thing is to pitch other shows even once a month keeps a continuous drip of connection in the industry overall, and it keeps you fresh and on your game. I'm sure you've seen that happen in conversation with your peers. They press you on something and you open up your own thinking. It's a growth mindset, and it's really special for your community to experience that with you when they're listening, even when you're on other podcasts. The idea is you always want to feel connected, right? And the third reason is you'll learn from other podcasters. You refine your craft. You're learning different interview styles. You know your strength in guiding the conversation and maybe where you can tweak your style. So we're always growing, right? Now, if you don't have a podcast, this is still a really good tool for two reasons. First, it'll give you a taste of what the whole interview process is like. You might get really fired up and decide you want your own podcast one day. And secondly, you want to be seen and heard as a thought leader. It's what you're aiming for, right? Especially if you have a really great understanding of the work that you do. And look, maybe thought leadership seems like a reach. Maybe then just knowing that you're capitalizing on what is commonly called the know, like, and trust factor. And for me, my favorite term is it builds your street credibility. So there's nothing wrong with doing it. And all that said, as you get on several podcasts, you might find yourself wanting to get on the live stage. It's okay to think big, and you should. Now, let's talk a little bit about the how. Um, we know why we might want to get on a podcast, but how do we go about finding the list of shows that really have our target audience? So let's just use for an example that you're a consultant in a human resource space. This will help us, sort of lock in the idea. So we're going to start with the podcast players. First is Apple, which is iOS, and the second is Spotify. And that's accessible on phones and PCs. So some people have Apple and some people don't. So you need to pick one or the other. Both of them are the biggest podcast player platforms, and everybody who has a podcast will be on both. So your search just needs to be with one, and it needs to be the key terms that identify your field. And you do not have to add the word podcast in there because it's redundant. You're on podcast players. So let's go to the example of the human resources consultant. You want to search for terms and key phrases that would be in your wheelhouse. Examples would be words like pivot, reinvent, quiet quitting, job change, career change, layoff. This will quickly help you find a body of work in podcasts that would be your target audience and shows. And if you are a podcaster, these shows are talking about some of the same things that you are, so it keeps you fresh. The first was podcast players, and the second would be a Google search. And it's kind of the same thing in terms of what search terms you would use that are discussed, like job change. The difference would be is you would add the word podcast in your search terms. And if you say to me, why? Well, if you just put the search term job change, you might get a ton of articles and websites and apps and different things that are talking about it, but not specifically podcasts. And that's what we're targeting. So that's the how. Let's put it on steroids. So you've learned how to find the podcast, but you need to dig a little deeper. You have to go into those shows. You need to make sure that they are active. This is a critical piece. You have to pull up each of those shows, every single one, and make sure that they're publishing new content. Some shows might post weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. They all have their own cadence. So you want to double check that and make sure that it's active. Any show that does not have any content posted within the last 60 days or more is probably in pod fade. That's the industry term for a show that has stopped publishing content. So now you have your list. What are you going to do? Well, let's pump it up some more. 1, listen to the trailer on each of them. Read the description, look at the different episode titles and who they have as guests, and maybe listen to a couple of episodes. What you want to find is that you feel like you could have a good chemistry and rapport with the person that has this podcast. You also want to make sure that what they're discussing resonates with you. You want to have a really good interview. There's nothing better when you really play off of somebody else's talents and energy. So it's worth your while to listen a little bit. And that way you'll also find the ones that you perhaps want to follow, because it's always good to learn within your peers. Now, the second thing is look at all the titles of their episodes and look at the guests that they're having on and decide what you could talk about uniquely and what value would you bring to their audience. More importantly, what conversations would be unique based on your experience? This is an important thing to look at because it's going to bring us to our next step. So you found this podcast and you know the value you can bring to it. You know what your conversation could be. How do you reach them? Well, you go into the show notes on any show. It should be built into each episode or their actual show website. Hopefully, if you find their email. If you do not find that, you can lean into social media. Check LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. The bonus is that you can connect and personalize an invite in LinkedIn. It gives you the chance to write a short message to entice them to connect and say, yes, please forward your one sheet. And I'll get to that part. If they don't put that information in the show notes and they don't respond on social media, which does happen, then know that when you listen to a full episode, they will likely give you a roadmap on how to find them, usually towards the end. Now let's talk a little bit about the pitch. So let's go back to what I mentioned before. The next step includes tools of the trade. It's what we call the one sheet. A one sheet is a bit of a mini resume and gives a snapshot of what you do, your story, and what unique conversations you could bring to their show. Always think about what makes you stand out. Where do you find a one sheet? There are templates everywhere. So don't reinvent the wheel. Go to Pinterest, Canva, Google, you'll find a template. Now, here's the important part. Pitching is an art form, and the secret to pitching is to actually listen. I'll dive into that more a little further down. But first, you have your one sheet, and it's not enough. You need your voice and your character to shine. Where will this happen? At an event, in an email, or a direct message in socials. So let's just say you were pitching me to come on my show and you really checked it out. You followed, you rated the show, and you wrote a review. That already is going to make you stand out. What else will really be a home run? You find an episode that you really liked. Now you are able to pitch me with your one sheet and identify something the show built. Your pitch and email will say, Holly, I really enjoyed your podcast. That interview you had with Alex really hit home for me. I had a similar experience in my job search, which instantly makes you more relatable. They'll realize you're actually listening, not just pitching. As I mentioned earlier, it's the listening part. So an elevator pitch should be short, right? You don't want a long email and then to attach your one sheet, because it'll be redundant and turn off the receiver. And let's be honest, our collective attention span has shrunk considerably. Say more with less. Don't repeat yourself from email to one sheet. Okay, so this is an exercise I use with clients when I'm trying to teach them how to pitch someone live, and it translates in written form. You'll need to make a few stylistic leaps from live to prose. but I know I'm talking to an intellectual bunch. I want you to pretend you're on the 25th floor at a restaurant in New York City. You're at this beautiful reception with all kinds of movers and shakers. The one person you really wanted to pitch is in that room and you can't get through to them. The crowds around that person were too big. So you wait and you plan to exit when they do. Imagine getting on the elevator to leave this reception with this person. You press the lobby button, and the two of you have about 30 seconds until you reach the bottom floor. What would you say to that person? Well, you're going to lead with compliments, of course, right? I love your show, Holly. I've been listening to it. I follow and share it with my friends. Thank you so much for the work you do. I've been listening for a long time, and I think that I have such a unique experience in the job search area that I could bring a unique flavor to your show. If you'd give me the opportunity to share my one sheet with you, I think you'll see that I might be able to do something really nice on your podcast with you. Could I get your email, please? There's your CTA, by the way, your call to action. So when you arrive in the lobby, do you think you got the email? I do. Either way, be sure to shake their hand and say thank you. Now, let's assume you got the home run. So what else? Let's talk a little bit about following up. I think there's not enough emphasis on this. And I think there should be a really big emphasis on this part. So following up, let's talk about that. 1, after you've been on the show, you want to send a thank you. Pretty basic, right? 2, as soon as it's ready to air, you want to send that out to everybody, colleagues, friends, family, shoot out the email and include the links so they could go listen. 3, suggest that they follow the show or rate the episode directly in Apple and Spotify. 4, use the transcript. They didn't capture the transcript. You can put that file in any kind of player like an otter.ai, and that transcript is long form content. It's Google's love language. Don't miss out on it. And 5, make sure you repurpose that transcript. Put it in your blog, post on social media, use apps like Canva to create like a nice looking post for Instagram that highlights a pivotal moment in the interview. 6, always tag the podcast that you were on and not just their individual page, but the podcast host. We're all doing personal branding, so make sure you give that shout out. And 7, don't just wait for them to share the show on social media and put that little thank you in the comments. Make sure you do put the thank you in the comments, but that's not it. You need to do a solo post. It needs to be organic. You need to talk about going on the show and moving them into your ecosystem and into your community with your own post. That's going to make a lasting relationship with them. And you never know. They might have you back on to discuss something else down the road, especially if you were a good steward of their podcast and their hard work. And now your ecosystems are shared. So now I want you to go out there and build yourself some content in a really fun way. You're going to make partnerships. You're going to end up with collaborations. You may even end up on stage, especially if you put your heart into it. You just don't know how these things can happen, what turns out. So I thank you. I'm Holly Shannon. I also want to thank Alex Sanfilippo and the team at Podmatch for this opportunity to spend time with you. And I think we helped you find some tactical steps to target the right shows. Thank you very much.